So in the 10-tier system, this design for a global society where we are creating systems that people can intuitively use, and we do want to, when it comes to the subject of intuition and how people will normally behave, intuitively behave, there is a certain balance between being innovative and creative with our solutions, yet still keeping things familiar. And ideally, we could have some sort of internal spiritual revolution where everyone suddenly cares about what they're eating and how they're managing their waste. But frankly, I think that's quite ambitious. But we can get there through a gradual cultural change and certain rules without stomping on people's freedom, without making it unfair or difficult for the individual, because you need to account for poorly educated people who are without many resources to sustain their life through change. Need to think about people who don't care. They don't care. They're people without morals. So there are a lot of ways, a lot of things to factor into the principles of the changes that we want to make. So one part of the 10-tier system that to some people could be resisted on face value when you first hear about it, because it is for some people an alien kind of change, something that is a little bit scary for some people, because they might perceive it as something being taken away from them. But when we look at possessions, individual possession, at the moment in this capitalist society, everything is owned. The land is all owned, the items are all owned, all the transport and the food and everything is owned. And while I think it's quite natural and sometimes important to have a sense of ownership over certain things, this is mine, that is yours, this is very important to me, therefore it is under my possession, my control, it's my it's my love, it's my sentiment. So that is important. We don't want to completely abolish individual possession, unlike what the World Economic Forum is proposing, where you will own nothing and you will be happy. And I've got a lot of things to say about that. I won't get into it too much, but I think there are inherent problems there. But at the same time, there is also something quite profound about a change where it is not just such a capitalist mindset, not just such a rigorous, selfish, if I can use that word, mindset, where everything is owned. And part of that is forced on us. We have to think in a selfish mindset under this capitalist scheme. So if you are selfless, you lose out, you lose the game. So people need to protect their assets in order to survive and thrive. So under a new system where people don't require that, where certain assets, not every asset, but certain assets belong to humanity, not to the state. And I want to make that quite clear, because that is important. So a lot of the time when people think about this idea of their possessions being taken away or losing ownership, when an asset is, let's say, liberated from the individual, it falls onto the state, the government. But in the 10-tier system, there is no state as is known. So in this, because there is no division, between the citizens and the government. They are one and the same. So while there is sort of an establishment, a system that would manage assets and whatnot, certain possessions would simply be liberated. They'd be liberated possessions. They don't belong to anyone, not even the government. And one of those things is land. And I'm going to talk about this a lot more in a different video. But that to be managers, to be shepherds, to be caretakers of this planet, I think is a very profound transition. I think an important one. And while people will say, well, I've been sitting on my land for 50 years, you're not taking it away from me, that's you can see where that mindset comes from. It's very understandable. People protect things that are valuable to them, and the idea is not to take anything away from anyone. It is to step into a different role of management. You will manage your land, you will build on that land, you will use that land, but inherently we belong to the earth. The earth doesn't belong to us, we belong to the earth. And I think that's an important transition in our human philosophy that can be empowered through legal changes, through cultural changes. So it's a little bit different with materialistic goods. So but think for a moment, if certain objects, like going back to pollution, packaging and containers. So we produce plastics and certain kinds of metals and certain containers. Plastic's the big one, obviously, but we use plastic because it's cheap. It's cheap, it's light, some of it can be recycled, a lot of it can't. But the idea is that it's cheap. It's cheap to manufacture, it's cheap to ship, it's very light, and it's strong. But I'll tell you what, let's imagine first, okay? If we had a system where your packaging, or the packaging produced by a company, doesn't belong to them, it doesn't cost the company, because the company in a society where industry is amalgamated and resources are delegated rather than purchased and owned, then it's not the company that is buying those and then the customer who is buying that off the company. It starts to get a little bit complex in terms of how the economy works under the 10-tier system. And bear in mind again that these are all ideas. This is a concept that is being developed and looks to be developed, but there is a lot that has already been developed and discussed. And but with this packaging, if let's say you go to a bar for those Americans who might not understand me. If someone goes to a bar and they get a mug of ale and they walk off with their mug of ale, they drink the ale and they go, well, I've got a mug now. And if they take that mug from the establishment, that's considered theft, because that mug belongs to the bar, and it costs the bar money to replace that. So because of that, it's theft. So imagine now if we had more, keep using this word because for lack of a better word, amalgamated types of packaging. So at the moment there's open game for what kind of packaging you might produce. But if you streamlined the manufacturing of packaging to have standards, much more standardized packaging, then the packaging would be able to be with much more versatility which might seem a little counterintuitive at first. But if you standardize the packaging, what works for one place works for another. Therefore, it's much more easily used with much fewer recycling costs and problems and difficulty. So you take a mug off the premises, it could be used elsewhere, but that mug doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to anyone. It is something that has been produced for society, and I think we are still quite adolescent in our approach to things like that. And I think at the start it could be quite problematic, where people will just go, oh, there's a bunch of free shit, and load up and collect it. But at the end of the day, if they can't sell it, they might be able to hoard it to a certain extent, but who's going to, there are only so many glasses you can hoard. But if you make it so that certain things like accessories are, again, this gets into the economy and how people earn money, the concept of money, and the dual currency that we'll talk about in another video. But yeah, I think that's something to think about, the how this concept of ownership would align with packaging and product use and product purchasing. But there is one final idea that I think is quite interesting to play with when we're talking about product use and product design, and including packaging, is something I heard about with buildings and architecture. And the question was, what is the most environmentally friendly building to build? What is the most, I suppose, economical in some ways, but what is the most environmentally friendly, the most building to build? And I'll let you think about that for a second. What kind of building is good for the environment? And the answer was kind of surprising, because a lot of people, when they think about this and constructing a building, you might think about materials. Is the most environmentally friendly building to build something made of glass, or maybe recycled plastics, or some other recycled good, or something that is perhaps quite robust? The answer is actually something that is beautiful. And the reason why is that beautiful buildings are maintained. People have love for them and respect for them, and because of that, they maintain them and repurpose them. Even when a building loses its original function. So, for example, a train station, a big, beautiful train station, once the train stopped running through there, people still like the building. It still might be iconic. And so people want to maintain it, people want to repurpose it and perhaps use it for a different function. For example, they might turn it into a post office. So these sorts of buildings, these beautiful buildings, especially ones that are well built, tend to last the ages because people want to preserve them. If something collapses or breaks, people will repair it. If an old ugly building with just some square old thing becomes a little bit dilapidated, if it becomes bad enough, people just go, well, knock the thing down, it looks like crap. We don't want that. We'd rather have a nice building. So they knock it down. A lot of the materials go to waste, and they spend a lot preparing the land and bringing in new materials to make a whole new building, and often something that can't be repurposed. So when you apply that logic to product design and packaging, it's if you make beautiful packaging that can be reused, if you spend more money per unit to create a product that can be loved and looked after and repaired when possible or when necessary, then you can find that nice balance, and in the long run reduce your costs, reduce your you don't need to be constantly manufacturing. So it's a very interesting idea to play with, and I think there's a lot of power in that, because a lot of products we know are built to expire. Certain phones, back in the day, my old Nokia, were chipped a brick wall. I could throw it about 8 meters in the air and not catch it, and it would be fine. In fact, it never died. These days, phones and computers, and especially electronics, but other products too, are designed to break after a certain time. They're designed to be replaced. And the 10TS system, through its implementation, will help to solve a lot of these kinds of problems, because it removes the incentive for these industries, these companies, to make money, to design a product with the core purpose of making money and profit. So if we can redesign society where that is not the primary incentive, where we're actually aligning the operations of society with what is good for the betterment of society, what is good for humanity, our health, our resources, and if we can make those alignments and make the changes to the necessity to profit, then we can change human incentive itself. We can change the way that people operate and change their mindsets, and from that change of mindsets we can change culture in a very positive way. So we need to allow people to be more giving. We need to allow people to be more environmentally conscious, because at the moment, how can people be? It's not a fair game. We don't have the resources and the infrastructure to be selfless. We don't have we don't have the ability to think outside of our own little bubble. We don't have the time, we don't have the money, we don't have the mental energy. So there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk soon.